What happens when one of the most respected actors in the world sits down for what should be a simple chat about his legendary career, only to face a barrage of dismissive comments and thinly veiled insults from a host who seems determined to make the interview about herself? It only took one comment about his age for the entire conversation to spiral into one of the most uncomfortable and shocking moments in daytime television history. Ian McKellen walked onto the Loose Women set that afternoon, expecting a friendly conversation. The audience applauded warmly as he took his seat on the famous purple sofa, surrounded by the panel. Denise Welch sat at the center, flanked by Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan. The atmosphere seemed light at first. Ian smiled graciously, his presence bringing an air of sophistication to the studio. Denise kicked things off with what seemed like a standard opening. Well, well, well. Look who we have here. Sir Ian McKellen, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thank you for having me, Ian replied warmly, settling into his seat. So, Ian, Denise continued, leaning forward with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. You have been in the business for, about 100 years now? The audience gave an awkward chuckle. Ian's smile tightened slightly, but he remained composed. Well, not quite 100, but it certainly feels like a lifetime sometimes. I have been very fortunate to have such a long career. Ruth Langsford jumped in, clearly trying to steer things in a more positive direction. And what a career it has been. From Shakespeare to Gandalf to Magneto. You have done it all, Ian. I have been very lucky, Ian said, his voice humble. I have had the privilege of working with extraordinary people and telling extraordinary stories. But Denise was not about to let the conversation stay pleasant for long. Lucky, you say? I mean, let us be honest, Ian. A lot of your recent success has come from these big Hollywood blockbusters, has it not? The Lord of the Rings films, the X-Men movies. Some might say you have sold out a bit, trading in your theatrical roots for a big payday. The studio went quiet. Even the other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. Ian's expression shifted, the warmth in his eyes cooling noticeably. Sold out, Ian repeated, his voice measured but firm. I would hardly call bringing beloved characters to life for millions of people around the world selling out. Those films have introduced entire generations to storytelling in ways that theater alone could never accomplish. Denise waved her hand dismissively. Oh, come on. We all know those kinds of movies are just popcorn entertainment. Nothing compared to real acting, real theater. You must miss doing actual serious work. Janet Street Porter shifted uncomfortably in her seat and tried to intervene. Denise, I think that is a bit unfair. Ian has continued to do theater. Throughout his film career, he has never stopped doing serious work. I am just being honest, Denise shot back, her tone defensive. I am sure Ian can handle a bit of honesty. Can you not, Ian? Ian straightened in his seat, his composure still intact, but clearly tested. I can handle honesty perfectly well, Denise. What I find difficult to handle is the presumption that one form of storytelling is inherently superior to another. Film and theater both have their place, and both require dedication, skill, and passion. Right, Denise said, though her tone suggested she was barely listening. But let us talk about something else. Your personal life. You have been very open about your sexuality over the years. Some would say perhaps too open. Do you ever worry that you have made your identity more important than your work? The audience gasped audibly. Ruth and Colleen both looked horrified. Ruth leaned forward, her voice sharp. Denise, that is completely out of line. But Denise continued, undeterred. I am just asking what a lot of people are thinking. I mean, every interview you do seems to come back to it. Does it not get exhausting making everything about that? Ian's face had gone very still. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades of experience and dignity. I came out publicly in 1988 because I believed it was important to use my platform to help others who were struggling with their identity. At that time, people like me were facing enormous prejudice, discrimination, and violence. I spoke out because silence was killing people. If you find that exhausting, Denise, I would suggest that says far more about you than it does about me. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Denise seemed momentarily taken aback, but she quickly recovered, her defensiveness turning to aggression. "Oh, here we go," she said, rolling her eyes, playing the victim card. "Look, Ian, we get it. You are a hero. You are a trailblazer. But some of us are just tired of having it shoved down our throats all the time. Can we not just have a normal conversation without turning everything into a social justice lecture?" Colleen Nolan spoke up, her voice firm. "Denise, stop. You are being incredibly rude. Ian is our guest, and he deserves respect." "I am just saying what everyone is thinking," Denise snapped back. "We are all supposed to walk on eggshells around certain topics, but this is Loose Women. We speak our minds here." Ian stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. The entire studio watched in stunned silence. "Speaking your mind, Denise, is not the same as being cruel. There is a difference between honesty and hostility, between directness and disrespect. I came here today expecting a conversation, not an interrogation designed to belittle both my career and my character." Denise laughed, but it sounded forced and brittle. "Oh, please, do not be so dramatic. I am just asking questions. If you cannot handle a few tough questions, maybe you should stick to reading lines someone else wrote for you." That was the breaking point. Ian's eyes flashed with a combination of anger and profound disappointment. "I have spent my entire life using words to illuminate the human condition, to bring understanding and empathy to audiences around the world. But I will not sit here and allow my life's work, my identity, and my integrity to be mocked by someone who seems to confuse cruelty with courage." Ruth stood up as well, reaching out to Ian. "Ian, please, you do not have to leave. This is not how we want this to go." Janet nodded vigorously. "Absolutely not. Denise is out of order, completely out of order." But Ian shook his head gently. "I appreciate that, Ruth, Janet, but I cannot continue this conversation in good faith. There is a difference between robust debate and simple rudeness, and that line was crossed some time ago." Denise scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "Fine. If you want to storm off because you cannot handle a real conversation, that is your choice. But do not act like you are taking some moral high ground here. You are just being oversensitive." Ian paused, turning back to face Denise one final time. His voice was calm, almost gentle, which made his words all the more powerful. "Denise, I have faced real hostility in my life. I have been threatened, discriminated against, and had my humanity questioned by people who genuinely believed I was less than human. I have fought battles you cannot possibly imagine. So when I tell you that your behavior today has been unacceptable, I am not being oversensitive. I am drawing a boundary that should never have needed to be drawn in the first place." The other panelists sat in stunned silence. Several members of the audience had tears in their eyes. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted completely. What had started as a standard daytime television interview had transformed into something far more significant. Denise's face flushed red. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in the entire exchange, she seemed genuinely at a loss. Ian continued, his voice steady. "I have spent decades advocating for kindness, for understanding, for the basic dignity that every human being deserves. I have used my platform not to aggrandize myself, but to help others, to shine a light on injustice, to create space for people who had no voice. If that strikes you as tiresome or preachy, then I genuinely pity you." Colleen stood up now too, her voice emotional. "Ian, please know that not all of us feel this way. We are so sorry for how this has gone. I know that, Colleen, Ian said, his expression softening slightly. And I appreciate it. But I cannot remain in an environment where basic respect seems to be optional. Denise finally found her voice again, but it came out defensive and sharp. Oh, get over yourself. You are acting like I committed some terrible crime. All I did was ask you some questions. If you cannot handle that, maybe you should not do interviews. Janet Street Porter turned to Denise, her voice cutting. No, Denise, you did not just ask questions. You belittled his career, you mocked his activism, and you suggested that his identity was somehow a performance or an attention-seeking exercise. That is not journalism. That is just mean-spirited. I have a right to my opinion, Denise shot back. You have a right to your opinion, Ian agreed, but you do not have the right to use this platform to demean and degrade your guests. There is a profound difference between challenging someone intellectually and attacking them personally. Today, you chose the latter. The audience began to applaud. Slowly at first, then building to a steady crescendo of support for Ian. Denise looked around, clearly shocked and uncomfortable with the response. This is ridiculous, Denise muttered, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Ruth stepped closer to Ian. Ian, I am so sorry. This should never have happened. Please know that this does not represent who we are as a show. Ian nodded graciously. I believe you, Ruth, but I must go. I cannot, in good conscience, continue to participate in this. He turned to leave, but Denise could not resist one final jab. Running away, then? I thought you were braver than that. Ian stopped. The entire studio held its breath. When he turned back, his face was calm, but his eyes were blazing with quiet fury. Bravery, Denise, is not about staying in a situation where you are being abused and pretending it is acceptable. Bravery is about knowing your worth and refusing to let others diminish it. Bravery is about standing up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. I have demonstrated bravery my entire life. I have nothing to prove to you or anyone else. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the studio was on Ian, and in that moment, his dignity and grace were undeniable. He had not raised his voice. He had not resorted to personal attacks. He had simply, calmly, and eloquently drawn a line and refused to cross it. Colleen wiped tears from her eyes. You are absolutely right, Ian. We are so sorry. Ian's expression softened as he looked at Colleen, Ruth, and Janet. I know you are, and I appreciate it more than you know, but some things cannot be smoothed over with apologies. Some lines, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. He began to walk toward the exit. The audience continued to applaud, many standing now in a show of support. Denise sat rigid in her chair, her face a mixture of defiance and growing realization that she had badly misjudged the situation. This is insane, Denise said to no one in particular. I was just doing my job. Janet turned to her sharply. No, Denise, you were being cruel. There is a difference. As Ian reached the edge of the set, a producer rushed over, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Mr. McKellen, please, can we just take a moment? Ian shook his head kindly, but firmly. I appreciate the gesture, but no. Some moments cannot be fixed. They can only be learned from. He walked off the set with his head held high, leaving behind a studio in complete turmoil. The other panelists sat in uncomfortable silence. Ruth looked directly at the camera, her voice shaking slightly. We need to take a break, she said quietly. But before they could cut away, Denise spoke again, her voice rising with frustration. Oh, come on. Everyone is acting like I murdered someone. All I did was ask some questions. Why am I the villain here? Janet turned to her, incredulous. Because you attacked a man who has spent his entire life fighting for others. Because you mocked his identity and his activism. Because you confused being provocative with being profound. That is why. I was being honest, Denise insisted. No, Colleen said quietly but firmly. You were being cruel, and there is a world of difference. The camera finally cut away, but the damage was done. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. It was not just an interview gone wrong. It was a masterclass in dignity versus defensiveness, in grace under pressure, in the difference between speaking your mind and speaking from your heart. Backstage, Ian McKellen stood quietly, taking a moment to compose himself. A makeup artist approached tentatively. Are you all right, Sir Ian? He smiled sadly. I will be. I have faced worse than this, believe me. But it never gets easier to encounter such casual cruelty, especially when it is directed at the very things I have fought so hard to defend. Back on set, the remaining panelists sat in uncomfortable silence as the commercial break continued. Ruth finally spoke, her voice heavy with emotion. This is not who we are. This is not what this show is supposed to be. Denise rolled her eyes. Oh, please, do not be so dramatic. He overreacted, plain and simple. No, Denise, Janet said sharply. He reacted appropriately to being treated appallingly. There is a difference. I am entitled to my opinions, Denise said again, clinging to that defense. Yes, you are, Colleen agreed. But with a platform comes responsibility. You cannot just say whatever you want and hide behind the excuse of honesty or speaking your mind. Words have consequences. Today, the consequence is that we humiliated one of the most respected actors in the world on live television. Denise stood up abruptly. I am not sitting here and being lectured by all of you. I did nothing wrong. Ruth stood as well, her voice firm. Then you have learned nothing from this experience, and that is perhaps the saddest part of all. The producer appeared, looking frantic. We need to figure out how to handle the rest of the show. We have lost our main guest, and the audience is extremely upset. Ruth took charge. We go back on, we acknowledge what happened, and we apologize. Not with excuses, not with justifications, but with genuine remorse for how our guest was treated. Speak for yourself, Denise muttered. Janet turned to her, her patience clearly exhausted. Denise, if you cannot see what went wrong here, then you are beyond help. That man has done more for equality, for representation, for basic human dignity than most people will do in 10 lifetimes. And you sat there and mocked him for it. That is not brave. That is not honest. That is just sad. The makeup artist returned from backstage. Mr. McKellen has left the building, she said quietly. He thanked everyone very politely, but he said he would not be returning. Ruth closed her eyes briefly, the weight of the situation clearly affecting her. We owe him an apology, a proper one. I am not apologizing for having an opinion, Denise said stubbornly. Then you are going to have to live with the consequences of that choice, Colleen said quietly. Because what happened today will not be forgotten by the audience, by the viewers at home, or by any of us. The producer signaled that they were about to come back from commercial. The panelists took their seats again, though the atmosphere was completely different from the start of the show. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that something important had shifted. When the cameras came back on, Ruth spoke first, her voice solemn. We want to address what just happened before the break. Our guest, Ian McKellen, left the show because he felt disrespected. And I want to say, clearly and unequivocally, that he was right to feel that way. Denise shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Ruth continued. Ian McKellen is a national treasure. He has spent his life not just entertaining us, but fighting for causes that matter, speaking up for people who had no voice, and using his platform to make the world a better place. The way he was treated today fell far short of the respect he deserves. Colleen nodded, her voice emotional. I want to apologize to Ian, to our audience, and to everyone watching at home. What happened today should never have happened. We are supposed to be a place where people feel welcome, where conversations are robust but respectful. Today, we failed in that mission. Janet added, Ian McKellen has forgotten more about grace, dignity, and genuine courage than most of us will ever know. Watching him walk away today with his head held high, even in the face of disrespect, was a reminder of what true class looks like. The camera panned to Denise, who sat with her arms crossed, her expression defiant. The producer made a gesture, clearly prompting her to say something. The silence stretched on uncomfortably. Finally, Denise spoke, her voice tight. I stand by my questions. I think it is important to challenge people, even people we admire. If that makes me the villain, then so be it. The audience responded with scattered boos and expressions of disapproval. Ruth closed her eyes briefly, clearly frustrated. Janet shook her head in disbelief. That's not an apology, Colleen said quietly. Because I am not apologizing, Denise replied. I asked legitimate questions, and he chose to leave. That is his decision. Ruth turned to the camera, bypassing Denise entirely. On behalf of Loose Women, I want to extend our deepest apologies to Ian McKellen. You deserved better. You deserved respect, kindness, and appreciation for everything you have contributed to the arts and to society. We fell short today, and for that, we are truly sorry. The audience applauded, a clear show of support for Ruth's words, and, by extension, for Ian. The divide on the panel was now obvious and uncomfortable. What had started as a routine interview had exposed something deeper and more troubling about the dynamics of the show and the responsibility that comes with a public platform. As the segment came to a close, the camera lingered on the empty chair where Ian had been sitting. It served as a powerful visual reminder of what had been lost, not just for the show, but for the broader conversation about respect, dignity, and the way we treat people who have dedicated their lives to making the world a better place. In that empty chair was a lesson about boundaries, about the difference between challenging someone and attacking them, about the importance of treating all people, regardless of their fame or status, with basic human decency. It was a lesson that some people learned that day, and some, tragically, did not. The show continued, but without its heart. The remaining segments felt hollow and forced. The energy in the studio had fundamentally changed. The audience, which had come expecting light entertainment, had instead witnessed something far more serious and uncomfortable. They had seen a man of immense talent and integrity stand up for himself, refuse to be diminished, and walk away with his dignity intact. They had also seen the cost of casual cruelty, the danger of confusing provocation with insight, and the hollowness of defending indefensible behavior under the guise of honesty or free speech. It was a stark reminder that words matter, that platforms come with responsibility, and that treating people with respect is not optional. It is essential. As the show finally ended and the studio lights dimmed, the empty chair remained. A silent testament to a moment that should never have happened, a conversation that went horribly wrong, and a reminder that even in the world of entertainment and celebrity, basic human decency should never be negotiable. The makeup artist who had spoken to Ian earlier stood in the wings, watching the empty set. I have worked on this show for years, she said to a colleague. I have never seen anything like that. The way he handled himself, the dignity he maintained even when he was clearly hurt and angry, that was something special. Her colleague nodded. He did not need to shout. He did not need to make a scene. He just calmly, clearly stated his boundaries and walked away. That takes real strength. And real self-respect, the makeup artist added. He knew his worth. He was not going to let anyone diminish it, no matter who they were or what platform they had. In another part of the building, members of the production team gathered in hushed conversation. The gravity of what had happened was sinking in. This was not just a difficult interview. This was a moment that would be talked about, analyzed, and remembered. The question was not whether there would be consequences. The question was what those consequences would be. One of the producers spoke quietly. "We should have stepped in sooner. The moment it started going south, we should have intervened." Another nodded. "But how do you stop a live show without making it worse?" And honestly, I do not think any of us realized just how bad it was getting until it was too late. It escalated so quickly. "It escalated because Denise would not stop," a third producer said bluntly. "Every time someone tried to redirect, every time the other panelists tried to bring it back to a respectful place, she doubled down. It was like she was determined to provoke him." "Well, she succeeded," the first producer said grimly. "She provoked him right off the set and potentially created a public relations nightmare for the show." Back in the green room, the remaining panelists gathered after the show ended. The atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Ruth sat with her head in her hands. Colleen stared at the floor. Janet paced back and forth, clearly agitated. Denise entered the room, and the temperature seemed to drop. She looked around at her colleagues, her expression defensive. "What?" she demanded. "Why is everyone looking at me like that?" Ruth looked up, her eyes tired and sad. "Because we are trying to understand how it went so wrong, Denise. How did a simple interview turn into that?" "It turned into that because he could not handle a few tough questions," Denise replied, her tone still defiant. Janet stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Stop it. Just stop. Those were not tough questions. Those were attacks disguised as questions. You questioned his integrity. You mocked his activism. You belittled his identity. That was not journalism. That was cruelty." "I was being provocative," Denise insisted. "There is a difference between being provocative and being offensive," Colleen said quietly. "Today, you crossed that line. And Ian McKellen, a man who has faced real discrimination and real hatred in his life, recognized it immediately. That is why he left." Denise threw up her hands. "Fine. Everyone thinks I am the villain. I get it. But I am not going to apologize for having opinions or for asking questions that need to be asked." Ruth stood up, her voice firm. "The questions did not need to be asked, Denise. Not like that. Not with that tone. Not with that clear intent to demean and diminish. Ian came here in good faith, and we betrayed that faith. More specifically, you betrayed that faith." "Oh, please," Denise said, but her voice was losing some of its earlier confidence. "He is a celebrity. He is used to scrutiny." "There is scrutiny, and then there is what you did today," Janet said. "You are confusing the two, and that is dangerous. Ian has been scrutinized his entire life. He has been questioned, challenged, and attacked by people far more threatening than you. But he has also been treated with respect by professionals who understand the difference between a challenging interview and a personal attack. Today, you failed to make that distinction." The room fell silent. Denise looked around at her colleagues, perhaps finally beginning to realize the magnitude of what had happened, but instead of reflecting, she doubled down one more time. "I am entitled to my opinions," she said, though the words sounded hollow now, repeated so many times they had lost any real meaning. "Yes, you are," Colleen agreed. "But entitlement is not the same as righteousness. You are entitled to your opinions, but you are not entitled to be cruel. You are not entitled to use this platform to tear people down. And you are certainly not entitled to expect the rest of us to stand by and pretend what happened today was acceptable. Because it was not." With that, Colleen stood and left the room. Janet followed shortly after. Ruth remained for a moment longer, looking at Denise with an expression that mixed disappointment, frustration, and something that might have been pity. "I hope you take some time to really think about what happened today," Ruth said quietly. "Not to defend yourself or justify your actions, but to genuinely reflect on the impact of your words. Because whether you accept it or not, you hurt someone today. Someone who did not deserve it. And that matters. Ruth left, and Denise stood alone in the green room, surrounded by the echoes of a conversation that had gone horribly, irreversibly wrong. The empty room seemed to mirror the empty chair on the set, both serving as reminders of absence, of what could have been, and of the cost of choosing pride over humility, defensiveness over reflection. Outside the studio, the world was already reacting. Social media was exploding with clips of the interview, with commentary on what had happened, with overwhelming support for Ian McKellen and criticism for the way he had been treated. The story was spreading rapidly, taking on a life of its own, becoming more than just a difficult interview. It was becoming a cultural moment, a conversation about respect, about dignity, about the responsibility that comes with a platform. But inside the studio, in that quiet green room, one person stood alone, still clinging to the belief that she had done nothing wrong, that everyone else was overreacting, that her right to speak her mind trumped every other consideration. It was a lonely place to be, and as the silence stretched on, perhaps even Denise could feel the weight of it. The empty chair, the empty room, the empty defense, all hollow reminders that words have power, that platforms come with responsibility, and that treating people with basic human decency is not negotiable. It is essential. It is fundamental. It is, quite simply, the right thing to do. And on that day, in that studio, one person understood that truth deeply and lived it fully, and one person did not. The difference between the two could not have been clearer or more consequential. The empty chair said everything that needed to be said,